Brett, why should we study Renaissance lyric poetry?
Well, I will first give you an umbrella answer that there are many good reasons to study it. My first point would be a little cheeky. It's difficult. And it is difficult often. I've told people when they ask about how'd you get into Renaissance literature, culture generally, and poetry particularly, I hope others kind of recognize things in their life that are like this, but really didn't grow up reading poetry. I read Life magazines. So it was really in college when I first started really getting into poetry. And when I encountered the Renaissance poets, certainly Shakespeare, but John Donne, George Herbert, I knew how to put this the right way. I knew there was something of great interest and value there before I could almost understand any of it. And so there was this kind of spur of like, I sense just beauty there. I sense that would be something I'd like to. And these are sometimes radical decisions, but this sense of like, that thing might just be worthy of my dedicating a lot of my life to, even though I don't understand it at all.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that's confirmed if that's kind of your urge. So, it can be difficult. The language is 400 years old, if not a little older. The settings can be, I tried to unpack some of this in the lecture last night, but the poems just get more and more interesting and kind of dense if you can put them in kind of a social context. What's it mean to write a poem about Caesar if you're at the court of Henry VIII? What does it mean to take Petrarch's metaphor of chasing a doe or a deer, if that might be Anne Boleyn that we're talking about? It's all those things are, I don't know, I think of those as icing. They never kind of define or are the things that justify the poem. The poetic expression is the thing that makes any poem worth our reading or our rereading. But, I think that's one of the things that can make Renaissance poetry difficult. It's just that need to, hopefully not to understand it in some immediate and general way, but it just deepens. The appreciation can really deepen and mature if you kind of get into the culture and the history a little bit. And, let me get back to even a more direct answer. I think a lot of these poems are surprisingly, I used the word durable last night. Here are these expressions from a very particular court setting by a man from Kent, and he's at the court of Henry VIII. And yet when he talks about kind of being betrayed in kind of a court intrigue, he talks about frustration in a love relationship. They're kind of shockingly expressive and hearable, and I think that's pretty awesome. There's something, I think, that's just so deeply humane about them. They're transhistorical, they're transcultural, and so I wouldn't want to overlook that aspect. I say that they're difficult, I'm being a bit cheeky, that difficult things can be good for us. It can kind of spur our imaginations and our interest in them, but I wouldn't want to miss the fact that they're also immediate. They're also impactful. You can read a Wyatt or a Sidney or a Shakespeare sonnet and kind of get it, kind of feel the emotion. So all the differences of culture and years and centuries, and there they are, still kind of pulsing. For us. So those are some first thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just to expand it a bit more, so poetry in general, in terms of the value in education, it tends to be, we tend to live in an age where grammar, structure, or writing, more of a manual type of writing is more important to get to the concrete knowledge of something. So what do you see as the value of increasing the amount of poetry in education?
Well, that's useful to put it in the educational context. I think for young writers, I teach a college poetry class pretty regularly. It's often rewarding. In part, of course, in a composition class, the 5-paragraph essay that focuses on pieces, carries out argumentation, does close reading. I don't think I would, even in my bolder days, say that, well, how to write a sonnet instead? It'd be a better practice for them in terms of the kinds of training they're going to need to be successful, liberal arts students and English majors particularly. The analysis is important. I will say, though, that to take, a student and say, okay, let's think about poetic structure. Let's think about surprise. When does a poem shift gears? When does a tone change? You really can, if you're focusing on poetry, develop really attuned young readers, whether of anything. Suddenly you're looking for those things in an essay form as well. And in terms of writing poetry, I think when a class is going really well, I love that students don't always know and this is going to maybe sound a little funny, but where that poem might take them. And I think the poetic, the kind of crucible that the poetry writing can sometimes feel like. I think it's usually a better poem I end up writing, but I don't particularly have all the designs on it yet. I'm going to cover these 5 things, as if it were the 5-paragraph essay. Writing poems, we're often kind of surprised by where they go. We're humbled by where they go. And I mentioned this at lunch earlier. I think it's because I think poems, ultimately, your allegiance has to be to what the language is doing. And even, well, is the language saying my message the best? Don't worry about that. Is the language doing interesting things? Is the language working at a high level, poetically, lyrically? You can worry later, or you can worry in a different genre if you're clearly getting across a kind of, preformed message that you hoped your poem was going to demonstrate or articulate. I just don't think, I shouldn't speak for most poets either, but I think for a lot of poets, there's something else going on mentally and imaginatively in the act of writing. And so getting back to the classroom setting, that can be thrilling for students, I think. I've definitely had students, they find themselves in the midst of something they didn't even know they could write about, didn't know they needed to write about. And yet when they're there, it's like the bone is exposed. I mean, the marrow is right there in the page, and that's really satisfying. So maybe poetry helps student writers get to places that other kinds of writing in a student context don't invite or aren't even really appropriate. So it's a particular kind of exploration and self-challenge, I guess.